Round 2 of the London Chess Classic took place today. 4 of the games ended in fairly mild draws. Magnus Carlsen, for example, got nothing against Fabiano Caruana's Berlin defence, and that petered out to a draw. But there was one game that really exploded into life almost from the word go, and that, of course, is the game we're going to look at now. Hikaru Nakamura with the white pieces against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Now, Hikaru doesn't mind playing in a slightly unorthodox way in the opening if he feels that it can unbalance his opponent, and that's what he's done here. Instead of allowing Maxime to play his Grunfeld defence, which of course he knows backwards, forwards, and however you'd like to look at it, he's avoided a Grunfeld by playing this, well, seemingly very tame setup, inviting Black to go into what would be a variation of the King's Indian attack reversed, like this. But the point is that Maxime is not so familiar with these kind of positions. So Nakamura prepared to gamble, but Maxime plays c5 instead. Well, this looks like an excellent move. And now, if White really wants to get anything, you have to push forward. But then this leads to a Benoni, where instead of White having a pawn on e4, the pawn is on e3. So, well, if White wants to get it anywhere, you really have to push your e-pawn. Rook b8, so Black is preparing to play b5, of course, in the standard way that you do in the Benoni. And now e4. So this is really remarkable. We've arrived at a standard position from the Benoni, except White is a tempo down. That's how much respect Nakamura has for the Benoni. So Vachier-Lagrave at this moment must have been very, very pleased with the opening. But both players around here started to consume quite a lot of time. It seems that, they were both slightly wrong-footed by the opening somehow. But as I said, this is a very normal position, but normally it's White to move. So Vachier-Lagrave has an extra tempo here, but how can you use that? Well, knight c7 can't be bad. But instead he played a really provocative move, knight h5, opening up the line of the queen and the bishop to d4. So sometimes there are ideas to give a check on d4 and then throw the queen out to h4 and threaten a mate on g3. Extremely dangerous. Nakamura thought for over 11 minutes before playing f4, so he can whip that knight off if there's any danger. And then the knight came back. And now, because Black shuffled back and forth with this knight, we've now transposed into a known line in the Benoni, but with the tempi correct. So, well, some strange shuffling over the last few moves. But, I mean, it's very well known that if White plays f4 quickly in the Benoni, this is extremely double-edged because it means this e-pawn lacks protection. And, of course, it opens up this diagonal towards the king. So both sides, of course, have to be very careful because White would like to push forward with e5, but his king is also exposed. It's also, you have to see that Black has a lot of pressure on that e-pawn. It's not so easy for White to develop his queenside pieces. Okay, let's see how things develop. King h1, well, that looks sensible. Knight c7, threatening to play b5, so White squashes that. Then a6, so reinstates the threat of b5, and a5. Well, looks sensible to stop this pawn duo marching forward, but in playing a5, of course, you weaken the b5 square, and now bishop d7, so now the Black knight can come into b5. I feel if White is going to break with e5, this is the moment And okay, it's a pawn sacrifice, but you know, white has a certain amount of play here. It's actually been played before, but it's extremely double-edged. But Nakamura played bishop f3 to protect this pawn, and that means that he would like, if the circumstances are right, to play knight c4. But after knight b5, already this looks like the kind of activity that black dreams of in the Benoni. This knight would love to slam in on d4, and that's looking at the bishop on f3, and this is really good fun. If this knight is exchanged, then pawn takes covers c4. This knight looks dreadful on d2. This pawn duo really strong, and there's still pressure on e4. So at this moment, really, white has to go for it. And well, after over 15 minutes thought, Nakamura plunged in with e5. So really double-edged. This was taken, so black is now a pawn up. Incredibly, this has all been seen before in actually a game of Tal's from 1967, a game that Tal won beautifully. Tal's opponent now played knight e3. And Tal did a remarkable dance with this rook. This is real artistry. So this rook, this can be extremely annoying. There could be some threat to h2 very soon. So this was kicked out of the way, and now the rook came back to e4, having weakened these light squares around the king. Then Tal sacrifices the exchange, and well, white's king was ripped to shreds. Perhaps I'll go through that game on another day. It's a really beautiful game by Tal, but with the two bishops and a weakened white king, this is great for black. Coming back to this game, Nakamura played knight e2. Looking at how much time the players had consumed, I'm sure they weren't aware of this game. But interestingly, Maxime sacrifices an exchange just like Tal. He knows the value of the two bishops. Well, if rook takes, then black is going to win back material because knight d4 is coming soon, and that's a horrible pin. So white had to recapture with a pawn, and just like in that Tal game, this of course weakens the king. Bishop comes in, and black is able to take a second pawn. One can also take with the knight, but okay, Vachier-Lagrave saw no reason not to go into the endgame, and this does look such good fun for black. Two bishops, two pawns for the exchange, so bishop and two pawns against a rook. Now black isn't even material down, and his pieces are just flying over the board. Looking at this, I really thought that Hikaru was going to lose this one. But there are a few adventures yet. Knight f4, so this forces an exchange of queens. So the bishop is attacked. And now this one, of course, has to come back, but it bounces to an even better diagonal. That bishop secures queenside pawns and looks down at white's king. This is very unpleasant. Here, it's a very, very complicated position, but it does look as though knight d4 is a very good move. Hitting f3, and this virtually forces the exchange of bishop for knight. And now with these two unopposed bishops, this does look very nice for black. But instead, well, Maxime played rook e8, which also looks like a lot of fun for black, just racking up the pressure on the e-file. And now, well, it might be possible to take on c5. I guess Hikaru was worried about the advance of the g-pawn, so he just nudged across with the king, which does look sensible. And now things went crazy. g5. You could still play knight d4 there, but clearly Vachier-Lagrave just wants to blast open the way to white's king, and well, let's see what happens. He comes very close. So obviously, if this is taken, then something nasty is going to happen here. So, knight e5. Black, of course, wants to save his bishop, bishop d5, and now, well, that one's a little bit vulnerable. And now here's a very interesting moment, rook g1. Of course, if black takes here, then bishop h6, and there's a nasty pin. So h5, just guarding the pawn, and now h3. Now, really interesting moment. It looks like here Maxime blew his chance. I mean, this is so difficult to see. I have to say, this continuation that black now has, well, impossible for a human to spot in a game. But my computer tells me that g takes f3 is actually a very powerful move for black. I'm not showing this to crow that one of the players missed a win, but I'm showing it because it's actually really beautiful. So watch this. Obviously Nakamura's idea was to pin this bishop, which looks, well, very nasty, but there comes a check. The king steps back, and now king h7. So bishop takes. White, for the moment, is a whole rook up. But now there is a beautiful move. I mean, here in a normal game, one would simply, well, probably stop earlier. But there's a beautiful move. Bishop e6. This little retreat, I mean, these kind of retreats are so difficult to see. And suddenly there's a threat to take on h3 and give a check with the pawn. And actually white is lost here. After rook h1 covering that, then simply king takes g7. And black is just too active here. Still, black's the exchange down, but with this knight coming in, this beautiful pawn on f3, there's a threat to check here. Well, black is winning this position. But a remarkable tactic and almost impossible to see. Instead, Maxime traded on c4. He obviously thought the position was getting a bit too hot, and basically, after this, pieces were exchanged off, and suddenly white has found coordination, and with pawns being exchanged off, well, after a few moves, I mean, the game went on another 20 moves, but basically by this point the writing was on the wall and they were starting to liquidate to a draw. Still tricky, but, well, a draw was on the cards. So there we go. I mean, this was a fascinating struggle, really tense, with the advantage switching back and forth. You know, both sides missed opportunities, but a great struggle. It reminds me, actually, of course, Maxime won a beautiful game just a couple of weeks ago in the European Team Championship against Vallejo. I actually featured this on my channel, so if you want to look up that video, I think it was round 5, played a couple of weeks ago, Vallejo against Vachier-Lagrave. Beautiful knight off that Maxime won using the two bishops. It's somehow related. Well, there you go. So after 2 rounds, only one player has scored a win so far, and that's Anish Giri in round 1. So he still leads the tournament with 1.5 out of 2.